Welcome to the College Football Podcast with your host, Alec Pecano, on Wednesday, December 11th. Today's video will be on the transfer portal. It is Season 2, Episode 0, Quarterbacks and Wide Receivers Transfer Portal Predictions. Let's get started here. So we start with the quarterbacks, and how this works is for example, Braden Locke. I'll give you 3 schools that he could go to, and then I'll give you the school I think he's going to end up at. So Braden Locke, quarterback, he was at Wisconsin last year. He's entered the transfer portal, and the 3 schools I think that could be looking for a quarterback. Number 1, obviously being within the Big Ten, Purdue, because I think Hudson Card might jump in the transfer portal at some point because his coach that brung him to Purdue, Ryan Walters, is now gone. So Braden Locke to Purdue would be the first team. Second team, he might go the group of 5 route and go to a school that just lost a quarterback in Darian Mensah to Duke. I think the second school Braden Locke could look at to go is Tulane. Because Tulane, like I said, group of 5, they need a quarterback. And I could see him going there. And the last school, the third one, is Southern Miss. They just got Charles Huff from Marshall. And they need a quarterback. And I could see Braden Locke going to Southern Miss. But ultimately, I think he's going to decide to go to either Tulane or I'm heavily leaning Tulane because I think he knows he'll be a starter at Tulane. Next, we get to Dylan Lonergan. Lonergan. Dylan Lonergan, a 4-star quarterback out of I don't remember where he's from. I know he was at Alabama last year. So he's in the portal. And I think he might take the same route that Eli Holstein took. Go from Alabama to another Power 4 school. And here's the 3 schools I have in mind for Dylan Lonergan. Number 1, go to the ACC. And go to Florida State. They do not. I know DJU's coming back, but I'm pretty sure this kid could beat out DJU to be the starter at Florida State. So Florida State's number 1. Number 2, Michigan. I hate to do this. I know they've got a 5-star QB coming in. And the kid, Bryce Underwood. But I think Underwood might sit for a year. And they might go out and get a kid from the portal. And I think it might be Dylan Lonergan from Alabama. So that's 2. And 3, he could go the group of 5 route and go to a Memphis, Tulane, Southern Miss, Marshall. Ultimately, I think, and if I get any of these right, come back to this video and you can say whatever you want. But the third team I think that could go after him is anybody in the group of 5. And I think he's going to end up going to Memphis because they need a quarterback and they don't have one. Now we go to this. Okay. So this is an interesting aspect. Stone Earl at Marshall. His coach just left to go to take the head coaching job at Southern Miss. And he wasn't the only one that jumped in the portal for Marshall. On the next portal episode, you may hear about some of his teammates that are running backs, and you may hear about in this one. We're also doing wide receivers later on, so you may hear about some wide receivers that are also in the portal for Marshall. But Stone Earl, they have him as a 0-star. I saw him in person when they played Virginia Tech. He has some talent. There's no question about it. Stone Earl does have talent. Now, here's the 3 schools that I think should be interested in him. One, obviously, number 1 being Southern Miss, because that's where his coach went. So I think he might follow his coach over to Southern Miss, which would make the most sense. Number 2, if he wants to prove himself and not play under Charles Huff next year, maybe whoever the new coach is at Marshall, maybe they convince him to stay another year and say, look, I know we have a new coaching staff, but you will still be guaranteed the starting quarterback at Marshall next year. Number 3, maybe he goes to group of 5. He stays in the group of 5, but goes to the MAC, goes to the AAC, goes to the Sun Belt. I'm going to throw a team out there, and I'm going to say Memphis. Maybe he goes to the AAC. It goes to Memphis. But I think he's going to ultimately end up going to Southern Miss to be with his coach. Kyle Lowe at Georgia State. He entered the portal on December 11th, which was today. He's a 5'10", 195-pound quarterback, 3-star in the transfer portal. I don't know that much. I know some about him, but I don't know that much. But if I had to guess, 3 schools that are interested in him. 1, and this is probably a long shot, Cal. Power 4 ACC school, Cal, because as you see, the next guy in the portal is Fernando Mendoza, which I will get to him in a second. But I think Kyle Lowe, Georgia State fans, how is it pronounced? I don't want to botch it. Is it Lowe or Lau? I'm just going to go with Kyle. I think Kyle can either go to one of these 2 schools. Cal, because they need a quarterback, because right now their quarterback is in the portal, as you see. Number 2, maybe he goes to Southern Miss to play for Charles Huff. And, I mean, he is at Georgia State. He was at Georgia State last year. So, I mean, I don't know how much sense that would make. And then 3, maybe he goes to Memphis in the AAC. But I think he might end up at Southern Miss. Now we've got Fernando Mendoza at Cal, who was at Cal last year, who was in the portal. 4-star. He's a 6'5", 225-pound QB. 3 schools that could be interested in him. Again, I'm going to throw numbers. Number 1, he goes back to Cal, which, I mean, unless Justin Wilcox has taken a job somewhere else, that would be the safest route for him to go, is go back to Cal. Number 2, maybe he goes to Michigan, because Michigan does need a quarterback. Like I just said about the guy a couple minutes ago that I had predicted that one of the 3 schools that should be interested in him was Michigan. Same thing with Mendoza. He would be starting right away at Michigan if he went there to be their quarterback. So that's number 2. Number 1 was go back to Cal. Number 2 is Michigan. Number 3, and this is the boldest take ever, and I don't know how smart this would be, but he goes to Penn State. because I think if Penn State makes a run in the college football playoff, I think that, or actually, I take that back. Maybe he goes to Georgia and plays for Kirby Smart for a year. But I'm going to predict, and I did okay with predictions last year for the transfer portal. I'm predicting Fernando Mendoza goes to Michigan. We're going to go past those guys. Preston Stone. Preston Stone is another interesting one. He's a 3-star that's in the transfer portal. And he was at SMU last year. He lost the starting job to Kevin Jennings. He did stick around the entire season. He put his name in the transfer portal. And the reason I skipped Tawan Smoot and Jake Strong is because I don't, those guys are going to make an impact wherever they go, but I don't think they're going to make that big of an impact. But back to Preston Stone. 3 schools that should be interested in Preston Stone. 1, he could go back to the AAC where SMU used to play. He can go to Memphis because they are losing Seth Hennigan. And I think he would be a good fit at Memphis. That's 1. 2, he could do the most hilarious thing out there, and he could stay in the conference and go to Florida State because they need a quarterback. Because Brock Glenn ain't him, and their backups in the portal, which we might talk about him in a second. So 1 was go to Memphis, 2, go to Florida State. The third team I think that should be interested in him, they're going to need a quarterback, is Louisville. And yes, I know they're in the ACC, but Louisville's going to need a QB. And I think Preston Stone would be the perfect fit at Louisville. Ultimately, I think he's going to go to Louisville. That is my prediction. I think he goes to Louisville. Next, we've got Grayson Loftus and Malik. Let me see something here. Is Malik Murphy in the portal? Braden Locke. Yep, right. Well, when we do another one later on in the offseason, you might hear another name from Duke. But Grayson Loftus, a 3-star QB, 6'3", 200 pounds. He was at Duke. But with Duke getting another transfer quarterback, so they will. Grayson Loftus entered the portal, and then they did get another kid that just transferred there. And Malik Murphy's also in the portal, but they haven't updated it yet. But here's Grayson Loftus. Here's my prediction. He could go the group of 5 route and go. I've said Memphis twice. I'm going to say it again. He could go to Memphis, be quarterback there, and then hop back in the portal next year and go somewhere else. So that's 1. 2, he could stay in the ACC and go to Georgia Tech, or he could go to Georgia Tech. He could go to Cal, so another ACC school, or he could go over to the Big Ten. And there's a couple schools in the Big Ten: Purdue, Michigan, Iowa is going to need a quarterback. He could go there. Ultimately, I think he's going to end up going to Iowa because they need a quarterback. Now you get to Colorado. A kid that was at Colorado last year, Dustin Wade, 6'3", 225. He's a 3-star in the portal. And I really think there's only 2 options for him. Two places he could transfer. 1, he could go, because I think Braden Fowler Nicolosi is a senior at Colorado State. He could go to Colorado State and be the starter there because I haven't looked at their depth chart, but I don't think they have a quarterback on the depth chart for next year that's capable of being a starter. So I think Destin Wade could go there, or he could do the most hilarious thing and go to Kansas because I think Jalen Daniels is going to be gone. And ultimately, I think that's what he's going to do. I think he's going to stay in the Big 12 and go to maybe Kansas or Iowa State somewhere. Then you got Dylan McNamara, a 2-star quarterback, 6'2", 218. He was at Florida State last year. I'm gonna right off rip, I'm gonna say I think he transfers down and goes to the FCS level. We're gonna do a couple more quarterbacks. Then we're gonna get into the wide receivers. So Caden Veltkamp. He was at Western Kentucky last year. And I think there's 3 schools that could go out there. And one, Big Ten, UCLA. And I think UCLA does need a QB. So Caden Veltkamp could go to UCLA. So that's 1. 2, maybe he decides to go back to Western Kentucky and withdraw his name from the portal. Did I mention he's 6'6", 236 pounds? That's a big guy for a quarterback. And number 3, Purdue. Ultimately, I think that Caden Veltkamp is going to go to Purdue. We're going to go down here and go to another Florida State quarterback, Luke Croman Hoke, a 4-star. Ooh, okay. That's interesting. We'll get into that in a second. But I think Luke Croman Hoke, 3 spots for him. 1, he goes to group of 5 route. He goes to, I'm not going to say Memphis. I'm not going to say Tulane. Maybe he goes to Florida Atlantic and tries to beat out somebody like a Cam Fancher for the job at Florida Atlantic. So that's 1. 2, maybe he stays in the conference and goes across the state of Florida to Miami because they're going to need a quarterback. Cam Ward is out of eligibility. And in number 3, he goes to the SEC and goes to Vanderbilt. Ultimately, I think he might end up at Miami. Then the last one we're going to look at is Michael Van Buren Jr. He was the Mississippi State quarterback last year after Blake Shapen got hurt. And I thought he played particularly well, 6'1", 200 pounds. 3 schools that should be interested in him. 1 is I think he might end up going back to Mississippi State if they don't get Jackson Arnold. If they do, then he's going to go somewhere else. 2, Iowa. Iowa's notoriously been a team that needs a quarterback. And they did lose Cade McNamara, who is back in the portal. So I can see Michael Van Buren going to Iowa. And 3, stays in the SEC. And he does the most funny thing ever. And he goes not to Ole Miss, not to Texas, but he goes to LSU. So that's my portal predictions for some of the quarterbacks in the portal. Now, we get to the wide receivers. And the first wide receiver is Tristan Wiley. 0 stars, entered the portal 6'3", 185. He was at ULM last year. Had a really good season at ULM. And 3 teams I think need to be interested in him. Number 1, South Florida. He could stay in the group of 5 and just go up, as I like to call it, up the group of 5 ladder and go to South Florida. 2, because South Florida is going to need a wide receiver. They are losing Sean Atkins and a couple of other receivers. So I think, and you might hear me say USF's name a couple times for some of these transfers. But, so that's 1. 2, maybe he goes to Arizona State to play for Kenny Dillingham. Because Arizona State's another team that's losing some receivers. And the 3rd team, and ultimately the team I think he might commit to out of the portal, Michigan. I think Tristan Wiley is going to go to Michigan for one reason. They need help at wide receiver. So ultimately, I think my prediction for him is Michigan. Then we get to Maury Smith, 3-star. He was at Tulsa last year, and he left because they have a new coaching. They're going to have a new coaching staff because Kevin Wilson got fired. 3 schools that I think Maury Smith could go to. Number 1, I think he could go to FIU because they just got Willie Simmons. And Willie Simmons is a really good players coach. And I think Willie Simmons would be able to coach this kid and turn him into a really good wide receiver. So FIU is number 1. Number 2 is Miami of Ohio. Because Miami of Ohio has a few guys that are in the transfer portal right now. So Miami of Ohio, and you might hear me talk about Javon Tracy later on. But I think Miami of Ohio should be in the running for him. Number 3, again, like I said about Tristan Wiley, I'm going to say the same thing about Maury Smith and some of these other guys. Maury Smith, the 3rd team that should be looking at him, and Michigan fans, you can back me up on this, is Michigan, because they need help at wide receiver. They really need help at receiver. And ultimately, as much as I want him to come to Florida and go to USF, I think he's probably going to end up at Michigan. Then you got DeAndre Coleman, a 4-star wide receiver, in the transfer portal, 6'2", 215. Was at Coastal Carolina last year. And the 3 teams that need to be interested in him. Number 1, Texas A&M. And I'm not saying that because of Jacob Bostic, who's the next guy we're going to go over. I'm saying that because I really do think A&M does need receivers. And yes, A&M did get a QB out of the transfer portal that did commit to them. But I think DeAndre Coleman would be the perfect fit for Texas A&M. That's number 1. Number 2, maybe he just wanted to see what was out there, and maybe he's like, oh, I want to see what's out there in the portal, but I'm keeping my options open, and one of those options might be coming back to Coastal next year to play. So number 2 is Coastal Carolina. Number 3, he could go up to the Power 4 level and go to maybe an Ohio State, maybe a Michigan, maybe Tennessee. Ultimately, I think he's going to transfer to Michigan State. to be with Aiden Childs. Now we get to Jacob Bostic, a 3-star. 3-star wide receiver that's in the transfer portal. 6'2", 183. He was at A&M last year. And I'm assuming he's in the portal because he didn't get a lot of playing time. So the 3 schools that should go after him. One, he could obviously, like I said about the previous guy, DeAndre Coleman, Jacob Bostic could take the option and go back to Texas A&M and stick it out and see if he could get playing time there. But if that doesn't work, 2 would be maybe he goes somewhere else in the SEC. Maybe LSU, maybe Auburn, maybe Texas. Or 3, maybe he goes down to the group of 5 and goes to like a FAU, a Tulane, a USF, James Madison. Ultimately, I think he's going to transfer to an SEC school like LSU, who lost CJ Daniels to the portal and is probably going to lose a couple more receivers. Now we get to we get to Matthew Henry, a 0-star wide receiver. I want to say that is Arkansas Pine Bluff. He was in the FCS last year. I think he's going to transfer up to the FBS to the FBS and go to one of these 3 schools. Maybe Mississippi State because they need wide receivers. And I think Matthew Henry would thrive in a system like that. 2, maybe he goes group of 5 and goes to Memphis because they're losing a couple receivers. Or 3, he does the unthinkable and goes to Michigan. Because like I said, you're going to hear me talk about Michigan a lot. Because I talked about them 3 or 4 times with quarterbacks. And now I've talked about them twice now with wide receivers. And ultimately, I think Matthew Henry will transfer to Michigan. We're going to go to Chris Hudson, wide receiver from Washington State, who's in the transfer portal. 4-star, 5'11", 175. 3 schools that should be interested in him. Holy moly. 3 schools that should be interested in Mr. Hudson. Number 1, Washington. I understand that's the big brother to Washington State, but I think Washington does need some wide receivers for Damon Williams, who's going to be taking over at quarterback next year for Washington. If he doesn't start in their bowl game. So that's number 1. Number 2, and this is the first time I've mentioned this school, Ohio State. We're losing Emeka Egbuka, and we lost Jaden Ballard, which I'm probably going to talk about later on. But I think Chris Hudson would fit in that Ohio State system with Brian Hartline as his wide receivers coach. Number 3, SEC, former Big 12 school, Texas. Texas is going to lose a couple wide receivers this year, and I think Chris Hudson would fit well there. Ultimately, I think he might also commit to Memphis. And then you've got Andrew Anthony. Michigan Pitts, was he at Michigan? I'm pretty sure he was. 3-star. But he was at Oklahoma last year. He's in the portal now. He was at Oklahoma this season. He's in the portal now. 3 schools that could go after Andrew Anthony. Number 1, TCU. Yes, TCU needs wide receivers. They also need quarterbacks, which I'm surprised I didn't have any transferring there. but they do need wide receiver. Number 2, and Michigan fans, you can yell at me all you want. I think Andrell Anthony should transfer back to Michigan. They need wide receivers, and it would make the most sense in the world. He already has familiarity with the school in Ann Arbor. And number 3, Miami of Florida, because they are losing Xavier Restrepo to the draft. He's probably going to get drafted. So, and ultimately, I think he's going to commit to Michigan from the transfer portal. Didn't I just say Memphis has a couple receivers leaving? Tyson Edwards is one of them. And I think there's 3 options here for Tyson Edwards. 1, he goes to another group of 5 school and maybe Fresno State or Fresno State, Texas State, some group of 5 school. 2, he goes up to the Power 4 and goes to maybe Florida State, maybe Florida, Texas, or 3, he stays at Memphis, which I think that's the last resort. I think he's going to transfer to Texas. And I did this last night on the college football podcast that I run with my co-host. I'm going to do it again on this one. I am going to say Michigan. And yes, everybody share this to all the Michigan fans you know. Michigan fans, I'm going to steadily apologize here. You earned all the wins you got the last 4 years against us. The last 4 years you've beat us. Fair and square. You didn't cheat. Congratulations on winning those 4 years. The last 4 years against Ohio State. And your national championship should not have an asterisk next to it. You won fair and square. That's all I'm going to say. You won fair and square. And me and my co-host briefly talked about last night on the podcast I run with him that there was some head coach hirings, and there's one that's almost finalized today, and that is, and I'm going to say this, I didn't think I'd be saying this. Bill Belichick to the North Carolina Tar Heels as their next head coach. That is not something I thought I would say at all. I did not think I was going to say that. And I'm shocked I'm even saying it. Now I'm opening up the show to the viewers to ask questions about college football. And if you have any questions about college football, please ask away. And also, I might be doing a watch party for the Ohio State-Tennessee football game next Saturday night here on YouTube or on Twitch or on TikTok. I don't know yet. I will let everybody know, but that's going to wrap up today's video. I will see everybody on Thursday for 2 more videos. We have no videos Friday. Have a wonderful rest of your day.